Before I share this memory with you, take a deep breath. Sink into your pillow. If you find comfort in these quiet, late-night stories, please subscribe to the channel and perhaps leave a soft comment below about your favorite late-night thought. It helps this small channel grow. Now, close your eyes and listen. I can still hear the quiet hum of that old kitchen. I was only supposed to be there for a few days. My neighbor had passed away quietly the month before. He had no family, no next of kin, just an old lease in a fourth-floor Bronx apartment and a landlord who wanted the space cleared out. I had the keys, and I volunteered to box up his life. His flat was strange. It was dark, smelling of old paper and dust, and everywhere I looked, there were miniature objects. Tiny, hand-carved wooden chairs sitting on the windowsill, microscopic glass bottles lined up on the bathroom sink. I assumed it was just a hobby. An old man with a steady hand, whittling away his lonely hours. I spent most of the afternoon packing up books while the city rain tapped against the glass. By evening, the only thing left to empty was the kitchen. I walked over to the refrigerator. It was an ancient, heavy thing, rattling with a low, metallic vibration. I grasped the handle of the freezer. The magnetic seal fought me for a moment before tearing open with a thick, satisfying thwomp. A cloud of icy, white vapor rolled out, spilling over my hands and sinking toward the linoleum floor. When the mist cleared, I looked at the top shelf. Sitting perfectly centered on a bed of thick, white frost was a wooden ship. It was a galleon, no larger than my thumb, intricately detailed down to the rigging. I smiled, thinking my neighbor had simply stored one of his delicate creations in an odd place. I reached in, my fingers pinching the cold hull, and lifted it out. I set it on the kitchen counter, thinking it would make a nice decoration for my own bookshelf. I didn't know it then, but I had just stolen their greatest monument. I looked back into the freezer, and that was when I saw it. The frost on the shelf wasn't just ice, it was shifting. Tiny, microscopic pinpricks of amber light were moving across the frozen ridges. At first, I thought my eyes were tired, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. The lights were moving in patterns, paths were being worn into the ice. Tiny, hair-thin structures were clinging to the plastic walls. IT was Oziti, a civilization, living in the absolute zero of a forgotten Bronx kitchen. My neighbor hadn't been making those miniatures. He had been harvesting them. Leave a comment to let me know you're resting well, and subscribe if you'd like to stay a while. Let's return to the ice. I stood there for what felt like hours, simply watching. The cold air stung my cheeks, but I couldn't pull myself away. They moved so fast. A single minute of my time seemed to span generations for them. The amber lights flickered, died, and were replaced by brighter, whiter sparks. I wanted to give them something. I wanted to see what they would do. I went to the pantry and found a dusty cardboard box of sugar cubes. I took one out, a perfect, coarse white block, and brought it back to the freezer. With slow, trembling fingers, I placed the sugar cube on the far right side of the frozen shelf, miles away from their main settlement. I backed away, pushing the heavy door shut, and went to the living room to tape up another box. An hour passed for me. Outside, the Bronx was quiet, save for the occasional hiss of tires on the wet pavement. I sat on the floor, listening to the rain, wondering how many centuries were passing in the dark cold of the kitchen. When I finally returned and pulled the freezer door open, the landscape had completely transformed. The sugar cube was no longer just a block of sweetness. It had become a beacon. The amber lights of the civilization had surged across the frozen shelf, completely enveloping the cube. I leaned in close, my breath forming plumes of fog. They had built a sprawling, chaotic metropolis around the sugar. The lights were no longer peaceful. They were a harsh, aggressive white blue. They were mining it. I watched as microscopic borders were drawn and redrawn in the frost. Entire generations of this tiny, nomadic society were living and dying in a frantic, accelerated rush for resources. I reached to the counter and picked up a single wooden toothpick. Slowly, carefully, I lowered the wooden tip into their world. I pressed it gently against the plastic edge of the shelf, miles away from their glowing city. To me, it was a gentle tap. To them, it must have been an earth-shattering pillar descending from the heavens. The white-blue lights instantly ceased their chaotic swirling. For a brief, haunting second, the entire freezer went perfectly still. They were looking up. They didn't care about me, but they knew I was there. They could see the massive, warm shadow eclipsing their sky. I pulled the toothpick away and closed the door again, leaving them to their glowing war. It was past midnight when I packed the final box. The flat was empty. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator remained. I walked into the kitchen, my coat on, my keys in hand, for one final look. I pulled the seal open. The rushed me. Bats's time, it was a calming, beautiful light. The sugar cube was gone. In its place was a hollowed out, crystalline ruin, stripped completely bare. The harsh, aggressive lights of their resource wars had burned out. Instead, the entire freezer shelf was now a breathtaking, synchronized grid of silver and neon blue. The microscopic structures had evolved from scattered settlements into a sprawling, hyper-futuristic landscape of smooth, glowing lines. They had mastered their environment. They had conquered the cold. As I watched, breathless, tiny specks of brilliant, white light began to lift off the surface of the shelf. They were ships. Tiny, flawless vessels made of compressed frost and glowing energy. Floating silently into the dark, empty void of the freezer's upper reaches. They were exploring their universe. I realized then that they didn't need me. They never did. My neighbor had taken their past, and I had fueled their industrial age, but this futuristic present belonged entirely to them. I didn't clean the shelf. I didn't reach out to touch the floating lights. I just smiled, my face bathed in their microscopic, silvery glow. I slowly pushed the heavy door forward. The light from the kitchen narrowed, casting a long, final shadow across their world. The magnetic seal clicked into place. The hum of the compressor kicked on, a low, steady lullaby. I turned off the kitchen light, walked out into the hallway, and locked the door behind me, leaving them alone in the dark, frozen expanse of their own making. Thank you for listening tonight. Before you drift off to sleep, remember to subscribe and leave a quiet comment below. May your own dreams be as vast and bright as a universe in the ice. Good night.